Jefferson County Code Law number 2 is back in session in cause number 328, 325. The case is styled the state of Texas versus Cody James Patterson. Mr. Patterson is present in court with his attorney Wright Kimler. State is present with Assistant District Attorney Tommy Coleman, and Attorney Lamar Johnson. Defense, are you ready?
Ready.
State, are you ready? Mr. Coleman, you had a matter?
Yes, just a couple of preliminary matters. First, I'd like to invoke the rule, Judge.
Okay.
No, I don't have any witnesses.
Okay.
With that being said, Judge, we have prepared and provided Mr. Kimler a copy of a notice, state's notice of extraneous offenses. We would have e-filed it, but for the fact that we just finished working on it prior to coming to court this afternoon. I do not intend on using any of these extraneous offenses in my case in chief, only for purposes of either punishment or impeachment. I think Mr. Kimler and I was saying, thank you.
I would just note, I think the term extraneous offense is probably a misnomer to the extent that it applies, the state is using it to reference offenses that aren't offered pursuant to Rule 404B, which is the extraneous offense rule. I think Mr. Coleman, despite the notice referencing 404B, my understanding they're not going to be offering these cases pursuant to Rule 404B as extraneous offenses, but will be offered pursuant to Rule 609 as impeachment, prior convictions for impeachment purposes. And then under 3707, during punishment in the event of a conviction as punishment evidence. I don't know that they're extraneous offense. If there are other offenses or other bad conduct for punishment, and then under 609 offenses that are subject to be used as impeachment, which aren't really, I don't know if those are classified as extraneous offense. There are other criminal history convictions.
Right.
But I would note that the notice does reference 404B, but based upon what Mr. Coleman's told me, they do not intend to offer any of these offenses pursuant to Rule 404B in the state's case in chief as extraneous offense testimony. Obviously, if the defendant testifies, they will be subject to be used as impeachment evidence under 609. We can address that should the defendant testify. I'll represent the report at this point. It's not our intent that Mr. Patterson testify in this case, in the guilt innocence case, so that I don't think that's going to become relevant. The 609 impeachment offenses will be relevant come up since he's not going to testify.
Okay.
Certainly, Mr. Coleman, under 3707 is, the rule is wide open as far as what the state can use in punishment. It doesn't have to be a criminal conviction or even a criminal offense. It can be bad conduct. So we're certainly able to use all that in the punishment.
Okay.
Again, Judge, we have no intention of offering any of these for purposes of the innocence or case in chief.
Other than for impeachment.
Other than impeachment in the event.
That's fine.
One other thing as it relates to this notice, Judge, because we just finished it up, we didn't have the opportunity to e-file it. I asked for leave from the court to file it, do the physical filing with the clerk's office or director.
I think the way it's written, it has to, I don't think it's just a physical, you could just e-file it. It doesn't take that long. It take a while to go through the system anyway. Okay.
One last thing, Judge, State's Exhibit 3, per our agreement, I have
Redacted
or what's the term? Redacted the sound, or muted the sound on all of State's Exhibit 3, except for these specific portions from timestamp 7.39 to 8.17. From 9.46 to 11.16, and from 12.07 to 13.15. Other than that, those portions, there is no sound on State's Exhibit.
But what is on the part that you haven't redacted?
It's just the communication between the trooper, the then trooper, and the defendant.
Okay. Mr. Kimmer?
I guess that's what we showed yesterday, just when you muted it manually. And so I don't have any objection to that other than just, I guess, whatever statements Mr. Patterson made that are recorded should be excluded pursuant to the fact that they were a product of custodial interrogations prior to it being Mirandized, that was the objection, I think, that lodged that was overruled. So I would still proffer that objection subject to the court's previous ruling that redacted copy states exhibit three. So I don't waive that objection, or just re-urge it.
Oh, because court is gonna then overrule it.
That's all I have.
Okay, now let me ask you this. On yesterday, the exhibits were published but not offered,
That's right, Judge.
or now, or how are we gonna,
I have every intention of offering.
oh, okay, I just wondered how we was gonna do.
I will offer them. In fact, are you prepared to offer them now?
I think the state offered the photographs, that was a visual. States too, I think.
Let's see,
States two was offered without objection, that was the photograph. That's my recollection.
no,
No,
Okay,
I don't think so.
all right.
I see,
That's card video,
The what?
card video.
I think what was,
Yeah, states 2 is patrol car video. States 3 is the body cam. States 4 are the pictures.
okay, the pic states four then was offered without objection.
I don't think I'll.
no, I see, I see it was published without objection.
Yeah, without objection.
It was published, not offered.
Oh, all right.
I think that's what y'all had agreed to,
I don't think.
Not the photographs. I thought those were-
but I think he did it the same way.
Okay, all right. I mean, I don't object to states, I don't object to the photographs.
Right. Okay,
Thought they were off. No.
okay, so, are we ready to proceed? Defense?
Great.
Okay. Mr. Porter, Mr. Bailey, if you could go get the jury, and everyone please stand while the jury is coming in.
Not true. She's in that good way.
Everyone may be seated. Let the record reflect that we're back in session in cause number 328, 325. The case is styled as State of Texas versus Cody James Patterson. Mr. Patterson is present in court with his attorney, Attorney Brian Kimber. State is present, Assistant District Attorney, Attorney Tommy Coleman. Let the record also reflect that the jury is present in the courtroom. State, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor, state ready to proceed.
Defense, are you ready?
We're ready.
Mr. Coleman, you can call your next witness.
State calls Tiffany Parker.
Ms. Parker, would you please come forward and raise your right hand? Ms. Parker, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Ms. Parker, you may put your hand down and you can have a seat in the witness stand. You could adjust the seat in the mic. Mr. Coleman, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Parker.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your full name for the court reporter?
My name is Tiffany Parker, TIFANI PARKER.
And how are you employed?
I am toxicology section supervisor at the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab in Houston.
And how long have you been with the DPS Crime Lab?
I've been with DPS for a little over 9 years.
And your duties with DPS Crime Lab, what do they include?
As the section supervisor, my duties include maintaining case assignment, conducting section meetings, performing troubleshooting on instrumentation and equipment. I also review blood alcohol reports. I make sure that the quality control documents are up to date, review discovery orders. And then as supervisor, I still work cases, but not as many as I should.
And your training and background that has led you to hold that position, what does that include?
My education, I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Texas Tech University and a master's degree in forensic science from Marshall University. My training with DPS for toxicology included reading numerous journal articles about toxicology as well as the equipment and instrumentation. I had to go through different exercises where I used that equipment and instrumentation. I had to take a written exam, and I also had to do a competency set where I was given a set of unknown samples and had to analyze them for the determination of ethanol. And then I also had to do supervised casework where an analyst that's already authorized to do casework watches me work cases. And then every year after that, I take a proficiency test.
And have you testified in court before?
Yes, I have.
And have you testified on a few or on many occasions?
I would say many occasions.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Parker, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 1. Can you identify that?
Yes, I can.
And what method or by or how would you be able to identify that?
I identified it by the unique laboratory case number that's on it, and that's just the report that I have. And then there's also my initial and date on this blood kit.
Did you have an occasion to analyze the contents of that, which you refer to as blood kit, to determine the alcohol content or concentration?
I did.
And when did you do that?
Can I refer to my notes?
Oh, please. Speaking of those notes, what did you bring here with you today?
In this folder, it has the laboratory report. It has the chromatograms, which comes from the instrument of the sample that I analyzed for this case, as well as the quality control that were run during this case. There's also the chain of custody in here. My worksheet that has my notes that I used during this case. The main case report that shows when the case was analyzed and who reviewed it, and any additional notes that go with that case, so any email correspondence. My statement of qualifications is in here, and then information on the a blood tube recall that you were recently notified of in September. Now,
those documents, including your report, were they generated at or near the time that the analyst or this substance was analyzed?
Yes, everything related to this case was, yes.
And does it help to refresh your recollection by reviewing those documents?
It does, yes.
And do you remember, have you analyzed few or many specimens since October 21st of 2020?
Since October 1st or 21st of 2020, it's probably been on the fewer side just because I am the supervisor now. But as a career, I've analyzed many.
And I guess what I'm getting is you don't remember each and every detail about each and every case, so it does in fact help you to review those documents. Right?
Yes, it does.
Okay, by all means.
Can you repeat the first question?
What I wanted to know is, how you were able to identify that it states exhibit number 1, and then I asked you what document or documents you were referring to. So you were looking at that to help I guess link or identify that exhibit.
Yes, so the report that I have here matches that one.
Okay, very good. And I think I may have asked you this, but just in case, did you analyze the contents of state exhibit number 1?
Yes, I did.
And what were you analyzing it for?
I was analyzing it for determine if ethanol was present and if so, how much ethanol was present.
And when did you analyze that specimen?
I analyzed it on October 21st of 2020.
And the DPS crime lab there in Houston, is it an accredited crime lab?
Yes, it is.
And who accredits that one?
It is accredited, we call it ANAD, and that stands for the American National Standards Institute National Accreditation Board.
Is there any other entity or body that accredits the crime lab?
The Texas Forensic Science Commission.
And if you could, in general, describe for the jury the process or the security protocols that are involved when the DPS crime lab receives any specimen of blood.
So when a blood specimen is brought into the laboratory, it is usually brought with a submission form that was provided by the officer that contains any information about this case. That information is put into our laboratory information management system, and then a barcode and unique laboratory case number is generated and placed onto that evidence. For blood alcohol cases, that evidence is then placed into a refrigerator that's inside of a secure vault until it is ready to be analyzed.
And is there any reason to believe that that process or that protocol was not followed in this instance with regard to State's Exhibit number 1?
No,
Prior to analyzing any specimen, do you inspect that specimen?
yes, I do.
And what are you inspecting it for?
So when I open up a blood kit, most of these blood kits contain 2 blood tubes, and they will have labels on them that contain the information that's also on that submission form. So I'm making sure that the information on the submission form matches the information on the blood tubes I have to make sure that I do have the correct case. And then I'm only going to analyze one of those blood tubes. So I'm looking at the volume of the blood, I'm looking at the time of collection, I'm looking at the blood itself to see if I see any clots or anything in it, and then I select one of those blood tubes to analyze.
And are you also inspecting it to see if there is any indication that it's been tampered with?
Yes,
And what, if anything, would you do if there is an indication of it being compromised or tampered with?
if I found that the blood kit was unsealed, then I would make a note of that. If I thought that the blood tubes themselves were tampered with, then I would possibly reach out to the officer and ask about that, but I've never been in a situation where I thought the blood tubes themselves have been tampered with.
And you refer to your notes in your report. Did you, in this case, with regard to State's Exhibit number 1, make any notations that would indicate that this specimen appeared to have been tampered with? And just for the jury's education, approximately how many specimens have you analyzed during your career with DPS?
I have, the last time I checked, it was over 6,000 blood samples.
And as it relates to blood samples, is there a requirement that you're aware of that the law enforcement agency refrigerate the blood specimen prior to submitting it to the?
I'm not aware if there is a requirement for the agencies to do that.
If an agency in your training and experience fails to refrigerate a specimen prior to sending it to the lab, is there a possibility that that specimen could be compromised or otherwise affect the results if it's not refrigerated?
If it's not refrigerated, there's studies that show long-term versus short-term storage for blood samples. For short-term storage, I would not expect a blood sample to be affected by not being refrigerated. For long-term, if the blood sample is not refrigerated, studies have shown that you might see a decrease in blood alcohol concentration over time.
So to be clear, if there is a degradation or if there is an effect, the blood alcohol concentration would go down.
It could, yes.
And that would in effect, benefit the defendant,
It could, yes.
resulting in a lower blood alcohol concentration.
Yes.
Now, is there a distinction between a long-term period of being not refrigerated versus a long-term period of non-refrigeration?
With the study that I've seen, the short-term period was approximately 2 weeks.
So is it fair to say that if the defendant was arrested on October the 3rd, and blood specimen taken on October the 3rd, and you analyzed it on October the 21st of 2020. Would you consider that to be a short term period or a long term period?
I would consider that short term, but that's not the time that it wasn't refrigerated.
Okay, and please explain.
So once the blood sample is brought into the laboratory, it is refrigerated. So when it was brought in on October 6th, it was refrigerated. And so from October 6th until I became in possession of it, it was refrigerated that whole time.
So from October 6th to October 21st.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about, is there a prohibition against sending the blood specimen to the lab via the United States Postal Service?
No.
Do you does the lab routinely receive specimens in that manner?
Yes.
Is there any concern as to the effects that the weather conditions, specifically heat, would have on the validity of the test results or compromising the blood specimen?
Not that I'm aware of through the mail.
Are you aware of any studies that address or have looked at the effects of extreme heat on blood specimens?
I know there are studies about not being refrigerated. I don't know about extreme heats or anything like that.
After all, this offense did occur in October, and you analyzed this in October.
That is correct.
You talked about the security protocol. You talked about what happens if the process when it's received. Any indication that that protocol wasn't followed as it relates to this specimen?
No,
Who analyzed this specimen,
I did.
and what scientific method did you use to make that analysis?
I use headspace gas chromatography with a flame ionization detector.
And to the best you can, to the best of your ability, can you explain that in layman's terms to the jury?
Yes. So I'll start with the headspace part. That's how these samples actually going to be injected into the instrument. I'm not actually going to take the blood sample and put that into the instrument. That's just a messy way of doing it, and it would cause more like troubleshooting and cleanup with the instrument. So what I'm doing is actually sampling the headspace or the gas phase that's above that blood sample and injecting that directly into the instrument. The instrument is a gas chromatograph with a flame ionization detector, also known as a DCFID. Gas chromatograph is a separation technique. So once that sample is injected into the instrument, it's going to go through a long column, and any components are going to start separating out. So when I use, like, say for instance, I was going to inject vegetable soup into the instrument, all those vegetables are going to start separating out and coming out at different times. And that vegetable is going to come out at the same time every time with that column, and that's how I'd be able to identify it. And then that flame is like a candle, and when that sample goes through it, it's going to trigger a peak, and that tells you how much of that sample is present.
And this method, this scientific method that you just described, the gas chromatography, is that a scientifically acceptable or accepted method of analyzing substances?
Yes, it is.
And have you, in your experience and training, found it to be a reliable method of analyzing substances?
Yes.
Is this a scientific method that has been around for many years?
Yes, it has.
The instrument itself that you use to perform this analysis, have you found that instrument to be a reliable instrument?
Yes.
What, if anything, do you do to check to make sure that it's properly functioning?
So in my process, I usually work cases in a batch. So I would have a batch of 30 cases, but in that batch, I'm also going to run a set of controls. Those controls are purchased ethanol standards from an outside company that have a known ethanol concentration. So I'm going to be checking those known ethanol concentrations with this instrument. That instrument is going to tell me what they are, and that's my way of checking to make sure the instrument is working properly.
And would you have performed that check in this case, in this instance?
Yes.
What, if anything, would you have done had it been shown or indicated that the instrument was not operating properly?
So for instance, if one of those ethanol standards was outside our percent agreement criteria that we have in place, then I would rerun, like resample and reanalyze that entire batch, including a new set of standards.
And after running this particular sample through the instrument, using that the gas chromatography, did you obtain a result?
Yes, I did.
And what was that result?
That result was a 0.308 grams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood.
Essentially a 0.308 blood alcohol concentration, is that fair to say?
That is correct.
Are you familiar with the legal standard for intoxication, or the per se presumption of intoxication in the state of Texas?
Yes,
And what is it?
it is a 0.08 grams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood.
So the law presumes a person to be intoxicated if 0.0, and in this case, the result was 0.308.
That is correct.
Is that nearly 3 times the legal limit?
Yes, over 3 times.
Now, during as part of your training and experience, have you become familiar with standard drink sizes and the alcohol concentration associated with the standard drink sizes?
Yes, I have.
Not to mention the various concentrations of alcohol as it relates to the different types of drinks, vodka versus bourbon versus.
I don't know the specifics of like each particular liquor, but I'm familiar with standard drinks. Yes.
What's the amount of standard shot as you understand it?
A standard drink for a liquor would be 1.5 ounces at a 40% liquor.
And 4 shots of, let's say, vodka, perhaps. What does your training experience tell you about the potential blood alcohol concentration?
If it was a standard 1.5 ounces in a standard drink, I would expect that 4 shots could get you to approximately a 0.08, because a standard drink is approximately a 0.02.
But is it fair to say in your training experience that 4 shots simply or only 4 shots of vodka could not get you to 0.308?
I would not expect it to, no.
Now, what happens with the specimen after you are done analyzing it at the lab?
Once I'm finished analyzing the blood sample and I've reviewed my reports, I will place the blood tube back into the blood kit and seal it up. I place it into a refrigerator that's inside that secure vault, and then it is either returned to the agency, or in this case, because it was a highway patrol case, it actually stays in the laboratory until it is retrieved for blood.
And is there any reason to believe that that process was not followed in this case as it relates to State's Exhibit number 1?
No.
Now, you mentioned a recall at some point where some of those blood tubes recalled.
I mentioned a recall that we just found out about in September, yes.
Does that apply to any of these blood tubes?
I'm not sure about this blood tube in particular. It's about the gray top that's associated with the blood tubes.
And what was the issue with those gray tops?
With those gray top tubes, there is a substance in them called isobutylene. And in a gas chromatograph, I mentioned that column that the blood samples go to. And in our system, we run it through 2 columns and get 2 different results. And with this isobutylene, it comes out at the same time as methanol, which is another volatile substance, in 1 column, but in the second column, it does come out differently than methanol. So if you have that dual column system, that you won't misidentify methanol, but in a single column system, you could misidentify isobutylene as methanol because of the retention time. So that's what this recall is stating, is that in their gray top tubes, there is a substance in there that if you have a single column system, you could be misidentifying methanol. It does not affect the alcohol results, as drinking alcohol is ethanol, which is what I was identifying here. And I did not report out methanol in this case.
And do you use the single column method or do you use the dual column method?
I use the dual column method.
So it wouldn't even apply because you use the dual column method.
That is correct.
Did you have any more involvement in this particular case?
After this case is reviewed and everything is sealed up, I don't have any more involvement until I'm called for court.
Now, we talked briefly about the fact that you did prepare a report. Did you prepare the report, enlist the findings, the results, the 0.308, is that detailed in your written report?
Yes,
And along with what other information is in your report?
that information, there's the laboratory case number on here, the contacting officer for the agency, if there's an agency case information, so if there's an agency case number that they provided, the offense date, the county, the subject's name.
Let's talk about the subject name. Whose name is this? Whose name is this as the defendant?
It says, Cody James Pattinson.
In which county is this there?
It says Jefferson County.
And what offense date did they have listed there?
I have October 3rd of 2020 listed as the offense date.
And what is the lab number that's listed?
It is HOU -2010 14049.
And what is the lab number listed on state's exhibit number 1?
It is HOU -2010 14049.
Fair to say the same lab number?
That is correct.
Is there any indication or any reason for you to believe that that is not the lab report that corresponds to state's exhibit number 1?
No,
And you've obviously reviewed your report prior to testifying here today. Right?
yes.
Judge, at this time, I have no further questions for this witness. I'll pass the witness and I'll also offer state's exhibit number 1 into evidence.
State's exhibit number 1, you have any,
One's the, both the box and the vials, or one is
Correct. What state's exhibit number 1 is that the box and its contents.
change, I would object change of custody, having suspicion.
We established the beginning of the chain and the end of the chain. That's all we can do.
okay,
Anything else goes to the
okay, objection overruled. Yes,
Afternoon. I guess you got promoted after, this test sometimes, is that right?
I was actually promoted before this one.
Okay, what do they have you back doing the test even with the promotion, or what was that situation?
Yeah, during that time, DPS was going through where at one point we were cross-trained in controlled substance and blood alcohol. And at one point they said the analyst needed to make a decision. So in the Houston laboratory, I was the only one that chose to stay in the blood alcohol section. And once I was promoted, I was also the only analyst as well. So I had to build a new team. And some of the analysts that chose drugs had to kind of help me as well. So we were all trying to work cases as well as trying to build a whole new team.
That would just be devoted exclusively to blood alcohol test.
That is correct.
And I guess blood alcohol tests primarily relate, if not exclusively relate to BWI.
Yes, that is primarily the type of cases we analyze.
Was there any other type of cases where you would do a blood alcohol test that would not be an intoxicated offense, like a DWI or intoxication manslaughter, or voting while intoxicated, those types of cases?
I think we've done a few death investigations where we've actually sampled a deceased person.
So that wouldn't be part of the pathologist, or you would be serving, I guess, as the lab for the pathology, toxicology on the scene, is that right?
We could, yeah.
Okay. Is that normal, or why would they just let the forensic pathologist farm it out to the normal toxicologist?
I'm not sure.
Beyond the purview, you just do what you're told. You don't really, I mean, do you have a specific recollection of doing this test? I mean, I know you've done probably hundreds of these tests over the 2-year period that we're talking, this is a span. I mean, you're going by your notes primarily, right?
Yes, I would definitely need to refer to my notes. I don't remember this specific blood tube in this specific blood case.
Sure, and I don't think it's reasonable to really expect you to have a specific recollection. And so your notes are important, right?
That is correct.
And it's important to take meticulous, accurate notes when you do these tests, because if you get called to testify, you want to be accurate, right?
That is correct.
And you do a good job with that, I assume, right? With those.
I would hope so, yes.
When this packet came into DPS in Houston, who is the one that goes and gets the mail or receives it initially?
It would be one of the evidence technicians would be, when the mail comes in,
Mhm.
they would receive it.
And what would they do? Would they open up the package and put a barcode on it or something, or what's the procedure?
So for this one, these blood kits are mailing kits, so they don't have to be placed into anything. They can be mailed directly like this.
Okay,
And so when they receive it like this, once they put that information in, then they would put that barcode and that laboratory case number on there.
and do they put that on the vials themselves or just the exterior of the box?
Just the exterior of the box.
Can I approach you?
Yes, you may.
So when we look at the, we opened this yesterday. Do I need to be wearing gloves?
There you
I
go.
tried to, but I did not bring it.
There you go.
Well, I think I've got this.
Okay.
I'm actually wearing. So these exterior, I guess vials, what would you call these?
Plastic containers.
Plastic components, all right. These exterior plastic containers aren't barcoded.
No,
Okay. And then if we open. What do we have there?
that is the gray top tube or blood tube.
That gray top is what you were referring or referencing. Plastic blood and evidence of drug court, all the pieces.
Oh,
So this gray top that you were referring to,
yes,
that's the, what you were referring to, you're talking about the recall, right?
yes.
What was it, isopropylene?
Isobutylene.
Isobutylene. Now, what is this exterior on here? It's just a little fabric covering.
Yes, it's just extra protection for the blood tube, so it doesn't break.
The blood tube is glass,
Yes,
okay, and there's no barcode on it, that's right?
no, there is a label that I place on there, but other than that, there's no barcode.
And this label, you're referencing, I guess it's an orange label,
That is correct.
and that has, those are your initials
Those are my initials,
and a case number, right?
a case number and the date, yes,
And the case number on that tube matches the case number you're reporting, is that right?
that is correct.
Double check and sure. right?
Yes.
Okay. So we can assume then that this number on here matches on the tube, matches your report, and it's the tube that was tested and that the report pertains to, correct?
That is correct.
Now, you said you don't test both of these, is that right?
That is correct.
Do you know which one of these was actually tested?
This one was actually tested.
Okay, so the one that I have is actually tested. And what are you basing that on? How do you know that?
There is no seal anymore on the gray top itself, and then I put an asterisk on that label on the ones that I test.
So once we see that asterisk, we know that's the one that you.
That is correct.
Why are there two if you don't test both of them?
There are two for if it was ever requested to have this blood tested by a different laboratory, then we can provide a sample that hasn't been opened yet and that they can test.
And maybe it may need to be retested.
If it ever is requested to be retested.
So you can't retest the one that's already been tested.
You can, if you want to, but with ethanol, that's a volatile substance. Once that blood tube is open, you're gonna start to see that decrease in ethanol.
Okay. So if it was to be retested, you would retest the one that wasn't tested.
For DPS, we don't retest, but if it was requested outside of DPS, we would expect them to probably want the one that's sealed and hasn't been opened yet.
So when this was received, the box was, I guess, code was the barcode was placed on the box to keep track of it, is that right?
That is correct.
And that we see that we're here.
Right there, and then I think there's one on this side as well.
And is that correlated to the numbers that are on the tubes? Is this barcode correlated to the number in your report that's on the tubes?
Yes, that HOU number, yes.
And so this number, that barcode would be this number here.
Yes, if you scanned it into our laboratory information system, if you scanned that barcode, this case would pull up.
All right. And so what is what did you call them? The technician or whoever receives it? What are they called?
The evidence technician.
Evidence technician. What do they do once they barcode it, receive it? What do they do with the thing? Log it in?
Yes, once all the information has been put in, then it's going to be placed into a refrigerator inside of a secure vault.
So your refrigerator.
Yes,
Just good practice, I suppose, because you don't know how long it's going to take to test it or.
yeah. And it's also required by DPS to refrigerate all biological samples
Well, why would it be? That's the policy of the lab.
at the lab, yes.
So why wouldn't that be the policy of the field office?
We don't have, I don't think we can generate or say what policies they have there.
So you're a different division of DPS?
Yes, we're the crime laboratory division.
So you have your own protocols and you do things your way and maybe the way things are done at the field offices are handled by another part of DPS. Is that?
Yes, we don't control their policies and procedures.
If we say biologicals, I suppose you have things that are submitted for DNA analysis and crime scenes.
That is correct.
And those are refrigerated as well.
Yes, any biological sample.
Some of those are probably pretty bloody too, I would imagine. Right, right.
They could be, yes.
How many refrigerators do you have?
I don't know the total number in our laboratory, but for blood alcohol, there's one main refrigerator where they're placed before analysis. We have 3 refrigerators where they're placed during analysis. So like, once I put the stuff on the instrument, I can put the blood kits and the blood samples back into the refrigerator because overnight these samples are gonna run. There's 3 refrigerators in our main vault that hold these blood kits until they're returned to the agency. There's a refrigerator in our vault that we put these in for the evidence text again. So I think I'm at, I don't know how many of that is. And then we have a large facility, we call it the bio warehouse, that has a refrigerator that keeps all the highway patrol cases.
Exactly, those would probably be related to DNA cases that you can't destroy the DNA because of them.
They're actually just all for blood kits.
Oh,
Yeah, yes. We actually store all highway patrol cases for all the DPS labs across the state.
I don't want to get too far afield in protocols for maintaining DNA evidence, because I'm sure you have, that's.
Yeah.
Worms there. All right, so in this particular case, Mr. Collins asked you, there's no reason to think any improprieties occurred, everything happened the way it was supposed to happen with this particular kit, is that right?
That is correct.
So it stayed in the refrigerator for, I guess, about 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks, once you got it.
Yes, it was from the 6th, and I believe.
21st, I think.
Yeah, when I reviewed on the 21st.
About 2 weeks.
Mhm.
So we came up, this was the day that you're gonna test this particular sample. You said you run them in about batches of 30, is that right?
That is correct.
So do you retrieve 30 of those boxes at one time, or what do you do?
Yes, so before I retrieve them, I'm gonna create a work list in that laboratory information system. And I'm gonna assign 30 cases to myself. And then once I do that, I will pull those 30 cases from the refrigerator.
And what prep work do you do before you run them? And whether it's a mass spectrometer, gas chromatograph?
It's a gas chromatograph with a flame ionization.
So just a gas chromatograph, you don't
Yeah.
use them to spec.
That is correct.
Is there any prep work that you do, or what do you do?
Yes, so once I have pulled those 30 cases, I am going to open each one at a time, and I'm gonna verify the information that's on the submission form with the information that's on the blood tube. And I'm gonna make any notes that I see on there. Once I have done that with each one, like I mentioned earlier, I place a label on those blood tubes.
And that's what we saw, right? That orange label.
Yes.
on your test. Okay.
And I'll place that on both blood tubes, and that contains the laboratory case number, my initials, and the date.
So do you have 30 little tubes lined up in front of you, or how does that work?
We have a test tube rack, and it can hold, I believe it can hold 50 or 60 total, but they're in rows of 10.
Okay, so 3 rows of 10 of those tubes, and then what?
So once I've done that with all 30, I'm actually gonna place the blood tubes on a rocker, and that's just gonna move the blood tubes like this. It just keeps the blood fluid throughout before I actually start sampling the blood.
Okay.
And then,
What's the importance of doing
just to keep it fluid, to make sure if there was any micro clots in there or anything, that it's all mixed properly.
Why is that important to make sure?
Well, in these gray top tubes, there is a white powder substance. So again, you're gonna want,
Well, what's that substance?
the substance is a anticoagulant and a preservative.
You know the name of it?
The preservative is the sodium fluoride and the anticoagulant is the potassium oxalate.
Now, so we could say really, I mean, is it accurate to say that the substance that's in the tubes, the liquid that's in the tubes, isn't just blood, it's a mixture of human blood and these two chemicals that you identified, right?
Yes, those are already in the gray top tubes before the blood sample was in there.
So once the blood is placed into the tube, it's not just human blood, it's human blood mixed with those two chemicals, right?
That is correct.
So the gas that you're analyzing is the product of not just the blood, but the chemicals as well?
Yes, those chemicals are mixed with the blood.
So you're really not just testing the blood, you're testing a compound, I guess, of blood and these chemicals, right?
Technically, yes.
Okay. So once the rocker has completed its process and you're satisfied through a visual inspection, I suppose, that the blood is a sufficient, blood and the chemicals that are sufficient viscosity, what do you do next?
So once I've done that, I mentioned earlier that I have controls that I run, and I also have calibrators, and those calibrators, are also known as ethanol standards. And that's gonna tell the instrument like what those controls are supposed to be. So we're saying this is a 0.01 ethanol standard and so on. So I'm gonna prepare my calibrators and my controls, and then I'm also gonna take 2 samples from each blood tube and place those on the instrument.
So you run your samples first, though, right? Separately?
No, everything's run at once.
So you run all 30 at once, plus the control samples?
That is correct.
And then when you get the printout, you're gonna have a breakdown of the results from each tube, I suppose?
Yes,
And you'll have the results from the control samples, and if those don't match the knowns, then you know that that run has been compromised or isn't accurate.
yes, if it's outside, we have a 5% agreement. So if it's outside that 5% agreement, then that control, since that affects the whole batch, then that entire batch would be resampled.
So-
And refined.
Does the control sample appear first in the printout to see if it's within the parameters, within the proper parameters?
Yes,
And you get a printout of all 30 plus the controls, right?
that is correct.
Okay. And it's the order, I guess, that you submit them is the order that they print out, correct?
For the cases, they are in numerical order after the HOU number, so it's gonna be in numerical order.
That they're submitted into the machine, right?
Yes,
Do you have that? You don't happen to have that in your file, do you? Like for all 30 of them?
yes. So this
Mr. Kilmer.
page,
I'm sorry, I have to, yeah,
Yes,
sorry. I'm sorry, this
Oh.
page?
so this page shows all of the calibrators and the controls. And then this page shows all 30 cases.
And so we have here 14049.
That is correct.
Where does that appear?
It's right there.
So this is all the ones that were on.
Those are all 30 cases that were run for this batch.
What is this?
This is the calibrators that were run, as well as all the the control samples.
Oh, I'm the outside of it. You've got your expiration dates and your controls. Is that right?
Yes, the lot number and the expiration date for those ethanol standards are listed on there as well.
Those are all. And it looks like everything was checked out, right?
Yes, if it's within that agreement and then off to the side, it will show that,
Yes.
yes.
And then. So this would be the one then that applies to this case.
That is correct.
And it's approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the ninth one in the sequence.
I think it's actually the 11th, sample that was run.
Oh, where am I getting?
Um,
I just can't count. It's 9.
Yeah. So it should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
11.
Yeah.
So we've got quite a few different results in there, right? But the range in all these things.
Yes,
Is that normal?
that is very normal.
You got some that are actually below 0.08, and you've got one down here that's 0.354, right?
That is correct.
So when these are submitted into the gas chromatograph, right? You're not submitting the liquid that is in the tube, correct?
That is correct.
You're drawing off air, or gas perhaps, air, gas, what was
It's the gas above the sample.
gas? And that's what's being submitted into the gas chromatograph, right?
That is correct.
How do you draw the gas off?
So I actually don't do that. It's the instrument. The instrument is entirely automated, so it's actual syringe. So how I prepare these samples is I take a small amount of blood and I place it into our instrument vial. And that instrument vial also contains an internal standard. And
Well, it contains an internal standard.
an internal standard is what we are using to actually calculate how much ethanol is present. That internal standard, the same amount of it is placed into every blood sample and every control.
So you're taking out, or the instrument itself, I guess, are you doing this?
I'm putting internal standard and blood into an instrument vial.
So you're physically taking some of the blood and the blood chemical mixture, I should say, to be accurate, out of the tube manually?
I use a diluter or a pipette, and I'm gonna stick it into the blood. It draws up a,
Through the vacuum process, right?
I actually take the gray top tube off.
All right,
And I pour a small amount into a disposable glass test tube. And then directly put the probe of the diluter into it, and it sucks up that blood. And since it's a dual diluter, I also have internal standard. And so then in my instrument vial, it's gonna dispense blood and internal standard into this instrument
Yeah,
vial.
I'm a little bit confused on this internal standard. That's another substance, right?
That's correct.
What is it?
The internal standard is made up of N-propanol, salt, water, and sodium azide.
Sodium azide. Is there a common name for that? Like salt is sodium chloride?
I don't know a common name for sodium azide.
What's the purpose of those substances?
So, the purpose of the internal standard and all of this is to actually calculate how much ethanol is present.
I thought the gas chromatograph.
It does that by using the internal standard from what's in the sample.
So you give this mixture now the blood and at least maybe 4 other chemicals, right?
It's gonna be one total chemical, so the internal standard, it's gonna be identified as propanol on the instruments.
Yeah, but that's in propanol, sodium azide, then we have the two substances that are in the tube to begin with that will mix with the blood, when it's drawn, before it even reaches the DPS lab. So those are 4 different chemicals that are mixed with the blood. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then you prepare a tube, I guess, and that's where the instrument vacuums the air out or vacuums the gases out.
Yes, that instrument vial, is sealed with it's almost like a gray top tube like that,
Right.
except that, and it's sealed. And then there is a syringe with a small needle that goes into it, injects the headspace into the instrument,
And that's for each of these 30 samples that you're running at a time, right?
as well as the controls.
The very well controls. And then, so you just like, I mean, forgive me, I've never really seen a gas chromatograph, but is there like a board, you just slide it in, or how do you get the vials in there for the syringes to penetrate to get the gas out?
So for, our instruments, it sits on these trays that are above the GC or the gas chromatograph. So the vials are sitting on top of those trays. And then that's how the syringe.
So how many of these do you run a day? These batches?
If I'm gonna run a batch, I'm usually just gonna do 1 batch a day, just because of how long that process takes.
Is there any way, I mean, that say the syringes that the instrument inserts into the vials, are those cleaned, or how do you maintain the integrity of I guess the sterility, so that you don't cross-contaminate your test from previous runs?
Yeah, so the instrument, the syringes are not cleaned throughout, they're purged with the gas that goes through the column, but we also test for carryover with each batch that we run.
How do you do that?
With one of those controls that is in this batch, it's a 0.5, so a very high ethanol concentration. And right after that, I analyze a blank sample that's just made up of propanol and water.
Okay,
And so as long as nothing is present in that blank, that shows me that there's no carryover.
but that would be just from that particular one, right? That, you know, that's not for all 30, for the other 30.
That's correct. It's not for all 30, but that shows that our instrument does not have carryover with a very high ethanol concentration.
So is it accurate to say that what's being tested isn't the blood and the 4 chemicals that it's mixed with, but it's the gas that emits from that that's being tested? Is that right?
That's correct. We are testing the gas above it.
Is the sample heated in any way to generate the gas, or is it just the ambient gas that naturally occurs in the tube? Is there any artificial, I hate, that's not really stimulant that relates to our organic entity, but the catalyst, maybe, I don't know what the word would be, that is applied to the sample to generate the gas, or is it just the ambient gas?
No, the sample is heated prior to injection.
Okay. How hot does it get, or what's the temperature that it reaches?
I'm not sure off the top of my head how hot the incubator is that we place it into.
What is it? Any way to figure that out, or just any?
I can look and see if we have it on our methods parameters page.
You test it with your finger with it burning?
It does get pretty hot. The incubation temperature is 65 degrees Celsius.
What is that for Americans?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
It's just 65 Celsius.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty hot. I think, yeah, when it goes 30 Celsius,
yes,
28, they start ripening in Europe when it gets, so it's pretty hot, right? It
Yeah.
would burn you if you put your hand.
yeah, the tubes have been, like, if they're immediately, once they're taken out of that incubator, it can still the heat from them.
So you heat the compound up, you get the gas is drawn off, and then how does the gas chromatograph generate the results that we see?
So once the instrument, the sample's going through those columns, it hits that flame ionization detector. And so that's gonna create those peaks and then it generates these.
I won't press you anymore. It's safe to say there's probably some sort of computer program or something going on there that the instrument's able to generate the results from what it's doing, right?
Yeah, there is a software program that we use in particular for this that's able to generate like these pages.
And you're not able to testify about any of that, you know?
I'm actually familiar with this one because I was actually part of the validation and I'm currently part of a new version of the software, so I'm pretty confident in like what it was built to do. It's more to generate like the report itself and the printouts.
But some way the instrument is able to take the gas that's thrown off and convert that into numeric data that we can use in court to apply to the law to see if it's their case.
That is correct.
I didn't really, Mr. Cole was questioning, I didn't really catch your education. What's your education background?
I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Texas Tech University and a master's degree in forensic science from Marshall University.
I didn't heard.
Yes.
Are you familiar, I guess, with the effects that alcohol has on the human body? Maybe outside a little bit of your customary duties at the lab, but just in general, based upon your education and experience?
Yes, based on my training, I have experience with that, yes.
Okay, so you did have some training. I mean, would you characterize, I guess in this case, the result we have generated for Mr. Patterson as a 0.308, right?
That is correct.
Would you characterize that on the high end of the results that you get?
I would say it's definitely on the higher end, yes.
What kind of effects would you expect a person to have, or the alcohol? What kind of effects would the alcohol have at that level on a person's cognitive?
I don't know, like, with particularly that level, because alcohol does affect everybody differently. I can just talk about the effects of alcohol in general on a person.
What's a lethal blood alcohol?
I don't know that there is a lethal limit because I have seen high alcohol concentrations. Again, it just depends on the person.
Mhm. Well, at a 0.3, do you think just a normal person, a regular person, the average person would be severely impacted as far as their mental thought function?
They could be, yes.
I mean, it's almost 4 times a week.
That is correct.
Would you expect them to have difficulty maybe cognitively in understanding things or responding, communicating, slurring their words, that type of stuff?
Those are some effects of alcohol.
But it's particularly at that level.
I mean, again, that's a very high level, so those are definitely effects that you could see, yes.
And you would expect the observable effects of the person to match that level of alcohol, right? If that's what's been generated, you would expect the two to correlate, right?
Not necessarily. Those effects can overlap different alcohol concentrations.
And I guess you haven't had an opportunity to view anything to do with Mr. Patterson as far as his video, where he looked when he was arrested or those stuff.
No, I didn't view any of that.
That's what.
Okay. Mr. Coleman,
Thank you, Judge. Just
y'all approach. Okay, Mr. Coleman, you may go forward.
Thank you, Mike. Just a few brief follow-up questions. Ms. Parker, is it your testimony here today that there's there was no indication that the specimen you analyzed in this case had been changed.
That is correct.
Is the instrument that's used to test the specimens, or the specimen in this case, capable of distinguishing between the mixture of the blood and those two additional chemicals that Mr. Kimber, that you and Mr. Kimber discussed?
It does not distinguish between those white powder substances. We do not test for the anticoagulant or the preservative.
Is it fair to say those anticoagulant and the other preservative, does it have any effect on the blood alcohol concentration?
No, it does not.
The science or the underlying science that's used here, is it your testimony that it's been widely accepted in the scientific field?
That is correct.
Has it been used throughout the state,
Yes,
in fact, throughout the country,
yes,
and has been used for a number of years?
yes, it has.
Mr. Kimler asked you about how alcohol affects people, and your response was it affects people differently, correct?
That is correct.
Have you, during your training experience, come across or been made known of the phenomenon of the practice drinker?
I don't know if I've heard it as a practice drinker,
What do you know?
like a chronic drinker or tolerance.
Tolerance. And what's your understanding of people with a high tolerance? Are they, as it relates to their, as Mr. Kimler put it, the observable effects of the consumption of alcohol?
Somebody that has a high tolerance for alcohol could mask some of those physical observations that you would see.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. I'll pass the word to Judge.
Mr. Kimler?
Since this test was run back in October of 2020, has there been some improvements made to the gas fermented brew?
Not that I can think of. This is,
You had mentioned the software particularly.
yes, the software itself, we're still using this software. There's just gonna be a different version of it coming out.
You think that it's going to be an improvement?
Not for the analysis part, it's just gonna be how these reports are generated. And it's actually more for a new version of the instrument itself, to help with that instrument. It's not, it doesn't change the analysis.
How does the new version of the instrument differ from the version that you're using?
So with the new instrument itself, it still has those trays that I mentioned, and the trays that we currently have, we can run up to a batch of 40 cases, and it's 3 trays. On this new instrument, the communication between the auto sampler and the instrument, there was no communication to analyze on the second tray. So we could not run more than a batch of 20 cases on that instrument. So the software is now gonna be able to allow the communication there so that we can run more than 20 cases, a sample or a batch.
You think that instrument's 100%?
Yes,
You have complete certainty, absolute certainty in the accuracy of the results in every case.
yes.
So 100% every case.
Yeah, I trust my instrument, yes.
That's what.
I have no
Let's
further
go.
questions.
Minutes witness, be excused. Mr. Coleman
Yes.
and Mr. Kimler. Ms. Parker, you may be excused. And you have a good day.
All right, thank you.
Judge, at this time, the state would offer state's exhibits 3, the body camera footage, and state's exhibit 4, the photographs that were published to the jury yesterday.
I had thought that the state had previously offered 4, and I had no objection before. 3, I've made no objections previously, Your Honor, and I'll regard ourselves at this time on 3,
Okay,
but I have no objection.
okay, your objection is over. States exhibits 3 and 4. Or admitted.
And Judge, at this time,
We will
the state will rest, Your Honor.
I have a motion to present, Your Honor.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm gonna ask that you follow the bailiff into the hall. We have a matter that has to be taking place outside the presence of the jury.